Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'd like to speak about intention and how that's part of our path. I think one of the brilliant things about the Buddha's teachings is the way in which so many things are made very clear. And some of these teachings help support us have a different frame of understanding. So the frame that the mind is the forerunner of all things puts things into perspective. That when we intend something, there's an awful lot that will follow. And certainly I can see that these many years of living monastic life and renunciant life, there's been a tremendous amount of blessing that have come from this teaching and understanding how my intention shapes experience. So something basic, like as part of monastic life, we did not eat after midday. And much of these years I've navigated health problems. And there would be times when the mind would go into a kind of like a panic around the food or not being able to eat what I needed to eat. And the value of a form is that it puts you in a position where you are empowered to explore edges that otherwise you never would. It's just not something that ordinarily, given to our own devices, we would explore, because it takes us into uncomfortable territory. And I would notice this the way the mind would contract and react, and around food, having the food that I needed, having the food when I needed it. And there was a certain amount of that was the reactivity of my mind. And so when I understood how to relax my attention and work with the reactivity, then there was much less agitation around it. So our intention then has an impact on the result. And what we intend will come forward in our speech and our actions, and impact ourselves and impact the people around us. And our intention is not always 100% pure. Sometimes it's mixed. And it is helpful to be able to review what our intention is as it becomes clearer. So for myself, I came to monastic life with the intention to use it to understand suffering and come out of suffering. That was my intention. And I was very much interested in getting out of the wheel of suffering. You know, for me, I could see the sorrow that was present in life and the complexity that would get woven in life, and I was interested in being free from all of that. And, you know, there's reasons why that was there. You know, there was experiences that I had in my family and generational experiences coming from Jewish ancestry that gave rise to, you know, somebody at a young age having an aspiration to wanting to come out of suffering. And that was, you know, like the strongest, clearest aspiration that I had from the time I was 17 years old up until many, many, many years later. You know, it was just very much a focused part of my life. That's what I wanted. But I began to see that in my own experience, that just this wish to get out of suffering was not by itself, and for myself, sufficient to get out of suffering. And so after about 20 years of meditation practice, and not being a slacker with it, having a regular daily practice, and before I was a monastic, going on retreats every year, and certainly once I was a monastic, then the embeddedness of the practice, the daily life reflections of it, the ongoing Dharma talks, and the lifestyle that was conducive of it, I could still see that there were plenty of areas in my own experience that I did not have access to, simply with the aspiration to get out of suffering. So a variety of things came together, and I began to think, well, maybe what was helpful would be to have a slightly different motivation. And I didn't know what another motivation might be, but then the possibility of taking the bodhisattva vows was offered, and several teachings around the value of how that can be useful was offered, and coming into contact with different teachings that supported it, I had access to. And so for myself, there was even though I didn't understand what it was really about the bodhisattva vows that was compelling for me, or how that was so radically different from the motivation that I started with, or what the actual consequences or results might be. So I didn't come with a lot of philosophical information. I came with a heart that was clear that there was something in my motivation that was not helping me, that there was an interest to have a different motivation, and an intuition that the bodhisattva vows of practicing in order to become awakened for the benefit of all beings might be a significant link in this journey of mine, that might help me shift. And so I did. I took the bodhisattva vows along with a bunch of other people, and I was surprised by the shift in my practice, because it shifted quite dramatically. And it coincided with being in the bush of Australia. So I took the bodhisattva vows just before going into like a long-term retreat in Australia. So I was in this wilderness area, and I'd never been to Australia before, so I was getting used to that environment and the land and the different creatures and the different way of the different creatures operated, And I began to notice that the land around me was showing me things about my mind that was curious. It was revealing my own intentions in ways that I hadn't noticed before. So one of the things that that happened when I first got to Australia, not long after being there, was there was a Korean nun who was there, and I don't know if any of you have had contact with Korean monastics, but their determination is so formidable. It makes us, I don't know what it makes us look like, but it makes our determination pale in comparison. Anyway, they're very, very, very strong in determination. So one of the practices that she wanted to do is tiger practice. And tiger practice is the determination to spend a period of time, 3 days, a week, 10 days, a month, 6 months, where you do not lie down ever under any circumstances. You don't lie down to sleep. You sit up sleeping. And so it's a retreat where you do not lie down. And so I think we were going to do this, I don't know, for a week or 10 days. And the thing about monastics is that there's an extremeness about monastics that's just quite why something like that was compelling to me, I can't actually tell you, but it was completely compelling to me. I was just really interested in this. But I knew, because I had all these health problems, that if I just muscled my way through this, I was likely setting myself up for a relapse that could take anywhere from 3 months to a year to recover. So it was edgy. I was interested in it, and I knew that if I just pushed my way through, it was a setup. So I had to find a motivation, a way of doing this, where I wasn't pushing. And so I thought, well, okay, I will try. I would give myself some escape clauses and see if I can soften my way through this ordeal, of sitting up and not resting. Because with my health problems in particular, one of the major triggers was not getting enough sleep. So it was perfect. It's a perfect setup. So while I was up at all these strange hours of the night and the morning, I was walking around the meditation hall, and there was an ants hill. And the ants hill was spilling over, so that half of the ants hill was actually on the walking path that went to the meditation hall. And being born in Southern California, in Los Angeles, where you don't know about ant hills, I had the brilliant idea, that I would just take a broom and gently nudge the ant hill to relocate. So I got the broom and I went out and I went over to the ant hill and I'm sweeping the ant hill, and it doesn't take very long for an ant hill to mobilize. So the ant hill completely mobilized, and within a few seconds there was like a search and destroy mission that they were all galvanized around, all of them, all 10,000 ants. So even though I'm not very smart in some ways, I learn a little bit quickly in other ways. So I realized, okay, this maybe was not such a bright idea, that I'm going to abandon my project of moving the anthill. And I went and put the broom against the side of the meditation hall and decided I will come back and give them loving kindness. Okay, this is also only somebody in Southern California would think about walking into a charging anthill with the thought of loving kindness, So I did, and it was like a 6 feet walk between the edge of the building and the anthill. I walked right back into the charging anthill with my new intention, and not a single ant bit me. Not one bit me. And then I was in the middle of all of this, because there's thousands of ants all around me. And I realized what had happened. Okay? I was aware that my intention was to do something that was good for the people, but I wasn't tracking that my intention was actually an intention to harm the ants, or destabilize them, or dislocate them. Okay? They got it, that it wasn't in their best interest, and mobilized. So they wanted to eat me. I changed my intention with the absolute naivety of somebody who lives in a city, thinking that that was going to be sufficient. And it was. In an instant, they all got the shift of my motivation. There wasn't a single ant, not one ant, that bit me. They could tell the difference between the intention to destabilize them and the intention of non-harm. I was absolutely blown away that an ant, 10,000 of them in fact, could tell the difference in that short span of time. It was actually quite staggering to me. There was another story with ants that happened that was also really, really powerful. So I was living in a kuti. I loved my kuti. I so loved my kuti. It was about the size of 5 by 7. And where it was out in the bush, and there was just only nature. I couldn't see any other building nearby. And there was a floor-to-ceiling window on one side and windows on 2 other sides. And when it would rain, there was a little place that would become a little water area, waterway, little creeklet, and a tiny little puddle that would fill up. And there was this Cadillac walking path that was like 3 feet wide, perfectly level, and made out of total sand that was like 50 feet long. It was the most glorious walking path I have ever had. It's beautiful. So I loved my walking path, and I would walk on it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth all the time. Well, connecting to my path was another path that went down to the library. And next to that path, about 10 feet off of the path, was another ants hill nest, and that ants hill was bull ants. And bull ants are a unique ant. They're about this long, and they've got pitchforks in front of their faces. And if they bite you, it's like 2 weeks of the most intense, unpleasant sensation you can imagine. The first week is excruciating pain, and the second week is excruciating itch. And one bite, it swells up to be like a lump the size of like an egg. They're really formidable. And these ants, which are this big, are fierce. And it doesn't matter if you're 6 feet tall or if you're 10 feet tall. They will fight you and protect their territory. So I had to walk past their hill to get to the library, to get to the meditation hall, to get to the dining hall, to get to the toilet. And my path was about 15 feet away from their hill. And when I was walking past them, I was absolutely alert, alert. And I knew I had to bring my light, and I could not walk without my light because it was really a big deal if I got bit. But on my path, I could walk barefoot, I could walk backwards, I could walk with my eyes closed, I could do whatever I wanted to do. And they were regularly coming onto my path to see about getting bugs or whatever to drag back to their hill. But on my path, they stay out of my way. It was my path. And on their path, I had to stay out of their way because it was their path. So this ant that's this big understands boundaries and respect, is ferocious in one circumstance and completely deferential in another circumstance. When I was in their territory, they were totally ferocious. When they were in my territory, they were completely deferential. An ant. So one of the things that this illuminated for me was that I had the view that respect was something you gave when somebody deserved it. That somebody needed to earn your respect before you behaved in a way that was respectful. And what the ants told me, or taught me, or showed me, was that there is a possibility of living an entirely different way, where you just live with respect because it's a good way of living. That you don't need to wait until somebody earns it or is worthy of it or deserves it. You bring forward the intention of living with respect because it's a beautiful way of living. Now, what the ants taught me about respect, I then brought into my own practice, which was part of the mixture of being in the bush and the Bodhisattva vows, which was instead of trying to get out of suffering, to turn to meet it, to receive it, to be present with it, to allow it, to be there. And as my motivation shifted, my intention shifted, then what happened was my experience also shifted. And so what happened as a result of the bush, the bodhisattva vows, the change of intention, was that I began to relax and I began to see things in my own experience that I had not had access to before. There were layers that I had not had access to before. I had no idea the level of fear that was kind of like background. I had no idea the anger that was stratified around the fear. I just didn't have access to it before. And underneath all of that was kind of like this cesspit of self-hatred that I had never seen before. So I had known myself to be somebody with a bright smile and very competent and capable in the world. And I had no idea that underneath all of that was this deep wellspring of deep, deep, deep disregard. And the shift of intention in my practice allowed me to access that which I had not had access to before. And I was sobered to discover, after all those years of meditation, that I had not seen it. So this shift of intention allowed an access into my own experience, which allowed a reveal of things that I had not seen before. Now, how much of it was the Bodhisattva vows, how much of it was the bush, how much of it was, I can't tell you. But the other thing that started to happen was my sense of being like a lump, like I was a lump in nature. You know, I showed up, and here was this foreign place in nature. And initially I felt like the nature was friendly, it was welcoming. So I felt like a lump in a friendly, welcoming environment, a solid and separate lump, being welcomed. And then the sense of being solid and separate started to soften and then dissolve, so that there was just nature. The nature wasn't inside or outside, it was just nature. There wasn't a strong, solid, separate sense of me. I no longer became like a lump in a friendly environment. There was just nature. And that was the real beginning for me of having more access, regular access, to that sense of what is pervasive and timeless and ever present. So for me, the shift of my motivation in practice opened me up to something that was just deeply and profoundly nourishing. Now, in other contexts, when I have heard people talk about the Bodhisattva vows, what I have heard them say is that what we do is impacted by the intention that we do it with. So that makes sense. And so if we start with an intention to do something that's noble, with an intention that has a limited span, then the result is not going to be as powerful as if the intention has a bigger span. So in the Vipassana community, in the Vipassana world, we don't usually talk about the motivation of why we practice. It's not even often in the conversation. And yet when we bring it into the conversation and start looking at, why are we practicing? There are different motivations. Some motivations are so that we have less pain in our bodies, so that we have a little bit more peace, so that we feel a little bit more comfortable. Other motivations are because our family benefits. What are your motivations? Why are you here? Why did you come? What were you hoping to get? And so when part of our motivation is to wake up, because we can understand that until we are awake, our capacity to help is limited. It's very much limited by the lens that we are looking through and the distortion of the lens that we are looking through. And so if part of our motivation is coming from the recognition, the realization that the clearer my lens is, the more benefit can come from anything that I do. And that wanting to be a force of the most possible benefit in this world, for my families, for my communities, for the people who have contact with me, even for the people who don't know me. We can see, logically, that if the motivation we have is going to impact the result, then that kind of motivation is going to have a different impact than another kind of motivation that has a narrow bandwidth. So part of the reason why I'm sharing this is as our own meditation opens up and develops, there's ways where we can look at our experience that helps us with a reframe that we wouldn't ordinarily have access to. So when our mind and body is really focused on my own personal experience, what's happening with me in my world, it doesn't really occur to me to think about what's happening with other people and what's happening in the world. But when our motivation is rooted in wanting to be of support and a blessing to other people in the world, then that motivation then can be a part of the way that we are nourished and resourced when we're dealing with some of the challenges that we have. Somebody on the retreat this weekend was sharing something that happens for her that is just profoundly uncomfortable, deeply and profoundly uncomfortable. And there are times in life where we experience things that are deeply and profoundly uncomfortable. And we might have a little bit of leverage with being able to shift it some. And oftentimes what's needed is to just find the endurance or the patience to weather it, that it's actually not within our control to shift. When our motivation for practice is connected to a wider sphere, then that makes it easier for us to move into the qualities of compassion or empathy or understanding, that there are so many people in this world that are navigating things that are so difficult. And the perspective of that means that it's not only about me navigating this by myself, but this is part of what we have to deal with as human beings, with these bodies and these hearts and these minds in this world where there's this constant impact and so many things that are so difficult. That it can support us to have compassion for ourselves and for another when we see that they too are up against challenge, that they have no capacity to change. So I've shared that my own motivation for monastic life shifted a few years ago. And in addition to moving out of just let me get out of suffering and let me awaken to a bodhisattva view or value or vow, which is let me awaken for the benefit of all beings. Let my practice be a support for all beings. That also shifted a few years ago to include wholeness and aliveness. That in addition to wanting to awaken out of suffering, there is the longing for wholeness, to have all of the different parts of what it is to be human, to be some coherence and congruence and have them all speaking to each other. To have access to my life force, to not have my life force somehow unavailable to me. And that those two are values that I hold alongside awakening. It's not that awakening is no longer a value, but I have these other values alongside it. And so that's, even though, this question of does this life still serve me, and is this still the best way forward for me to do the things that I need to do, has been a question that has surfaced for many, many, many years. Because my original intention was to stay until I knew with clarity that it no longer served me. Even though I had doubts, plenty of doubts, and certainly I was navigating circumstances many times that were very challenging. The doubts is different than the clarity. So my intention when I ordained was to stay until I knew with clarity that it no longer served me. Me. I don't know what it is serving anybody else, but serving me. And as long as my motivation was only focused on awakening, I did not have the clarity that it no longer served me. But when my motivation included wholeness and aliveness alongside awakening, and I could see my own response to the way I am living in this monastic form, and what happens with my energy, and the way I hold back, in the way certain of my needs are not met and not likely going to be met in the near future. Together, aliveness, wholeness alongside awakening, I could see it no longer was a good match. But I was able to honor my intention, which is to stay until I knew with clarity that it no longer served. And because this life is so rare, and in some ways so incredibly precious, so valuable, it was really important to me that I honored my intention to stay until I knew with clarity. And so we can make intentions. And those intentions can both be a support for moving through incredible challenges, as well as hold us in something that might not longer be a good match, until we are able to reevaluate how our intention has shifted and make a new choice from that. So for me, I can see that both the gradual path where there's step by step progress of working with bringing more skill, more virtue, letting go of what is not skillful, letting go of what no longer serves, this gradual path of moving towards what is wholesome is an incredibly beautiful and important path. And it's not on billboards. It's not in most magazines. It's not something that we have easy access to. The teachings, we don't have easy access to the teachings in our mainstream secular world. In our Dharma communities, yes. And this gradual path has alongside it the imminent path, that at any moment in time, at any point, it's possible just to drop the confusions, drop the identities, drop the things, the machinations of who and what we think we are and who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to be doing, and have the mind just open into wonder, into awe, into the exquisite beauty of awareness that is timeless, that's pervasive, and to see that it has always been here, to see that it will always be there, to see that that will never shift, that will never change. And to know that that is where our real safety and security can come from. That anything other than that is trembling, it's shaking, it's highly dependent on conditions. It's not something that we're ever going to be able to fully lean on and rely upon. And to know that in our bone marrow, that is the truth. Does your intention have within it the aspiration to know that? But from my experience, most of my life in listening to the Dhamma has been that has been the only thing that is important. That is the only thing that we really need to pay attention to. That if somehow we are able to understand that, to realize that, to have the blessings, the grace, the ripening of good fortune, to know that, then nothing else matters. There is no human need that can measure against that. And I have had to look and see, is that true in my experience? And in my own human experience, there's the place where that's true, and there's the place where that's not true. When I'm touching that experience, when I'm in it, when I'm resting in it, when that is what my abiding reality is, all other human needs quiet down. It's an experience of total satiation. In an ordinary mind, in an ordinary experience of navigating the world of relationships, of having a body and a heart and a mind, where that is not where I'm resting, then it is not sufficient just to think about when I am able in the future to arrive there. Then the needs that I have now will not matter. And to take them seriously as being worthy of care and attention and respect. How can I advocate for them? How can I know what they are? Somewhere along the line, and I don't know when or where, there wasn't a defining period of time. There was not one thing. But there was a clarity for me that I was interested in understanding suffering and the end of suffering, and I did not care where the suffering was coming from. It didn't matter to me if it was transpersonal suffering or personal suffering or pre-personal suffering or relational suffering. And so part of me, I can see, has tried to leapfrog over some of my own personal work in order to arrive at the place where there was no more need to do any personal work. Does that sound familiar? But somehow, this path of awakening will land me in a place where I don't have to grow up, where all of my need for belonging and love and affection and wholeness, all of my issues around power and authority, all of my issues around needing to have certain things met in order to feel safe, it will be absolved. And my experience has shown me that even while there can be deep and profound insight and access, the human still has its needs. And I still have work to grow up. To know what my needs are. To speak them, to advocate, to learn how to do it without it being at somebody else's expense. And then to learn how to attune to a variety of different people and to get a sense of what different people's needs different people have. And that the path of insight does not automatically give me the capacity to do that other work. So my intention to heal, my intention for wholeness, my intention for awakening has been the result of my life path. So I share my own experience as a way of revealing my own journey with that. And my intention really is not for you to try and be like me. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in you being like you. I'm interested in you knowing what your own intentions are. I'm interested in you coming to the edges of them and working it and seeing, are your intentions working for you? Are your intentions congruent with your values? Are they congruent with where your heart aspiration? And invite you to consider the possibility that your intention may need to be re-examined. In light of where you are now. That is true and real and alive for you now. That you can stand behind now. Because when intention supports you in that way, it is a formidable force to relax into, to rely on, to lean into, to hold you through the ordinary and extraordinary vicissitudes that we experience. And so it is useful to review, to let intention be a force in our life that supports us with how we live and what we do. In the direction we want to go. And so I share my personal experience to support you to do that in your own.